a website. I don't know how they know it.
It's not mentioned. Is it mentioned in the Torah anywhere when she passed away? It's not mentioned, is it?
Yeah, it is.
It doesn't say a date, does it? She died in Parshas Chukas. Parshas Chukas, you know. Both. See, you know what? I was in Camp Aguda as an adult. I was invited one Shabbos, and they asked me to speak. So I kind of lowered it to the level of the to the campers. So I had a little quiz. Name 3 Gedolim that, and it was Parshas Chukas. Name 3 Gedolim who died in this week's Parsha. So it was Miriam, Aaron, and the third one's a trick question. Og Melech HaBashan died in this week. So those were the 3 Gedolim.
A different type of Gadol.
Oh, it's in the Parsha that he died?
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. You have to remember that come Parshas Chukas. Okay, gewaltig. So I spoke with Shimon Stern yesterday, and
Oh, how is it?
he didn't sound very good. But when I met his son, Eli was in shul last night from Mincha. He said that all Shabbos was a rough day. Sunday he was doing much better. And I sold my chametz to the Rav yesterday, and he told me that Ernie Mann's not doing too well.
Oy.
So
What happened?
No, he's just not. He's not progressing. He's
not progressing, but he's not in danger, is he?
No, he's not in danger.
Is he home? They were taking him home. He is
He's
home.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, our learning should be Schos Refu Shalom for Shimon, Yehuda ben Rivka, Yaakov, Shmuel ben Chana, and Shimon ben Chasya, and Yaakov, and Yisrael Moshe ben Yenta Gittel, and for Elio Shraga Faivish ben Esther, and all the Chayla Yisrael should have a Refu Shalom. Okay. So yesterday we were fortunate enough to finish the parak, so we're up to the new parak, and I'm trying to get a little bit of ahead because we have 2 days Yom Tov in a row. So even though we learn on Yom Tov, although some days it might be a little bit hard, but the first day Pesach after everyone's up late, Isru Chag Mati says right because everyone's up all night cleaning up from Pesach. So I figured if we get a blot or two in the bank, it cannot hurt. Okay. You know, I just imagine if I'm going to say Shir Matzah Yom Tov, it's going to cost me big time in Shalom Bayis points. Actually, it won't, because if I'm learning, then I'm not helping Mishkafelach. But if I'm sitting around the couch and not helping them, I'm big trouble. Okay. Zakte Heilig Gemara. Hachoylitz Liman, Heilig Mishnah on the top of Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Hachoylitz Liavim. Someone did chalitza on his Yevamos. V'nimtas muberis, and then they found out that she was pregnant. V'yolda, and she gave birth. Bisman shavlat shel kayama. If this child is going to survive, and the Gemara is going to discuss what that means. But if the vlat survives, so it shows that she never really was zakok to Yibam, which means the chalitza that she didn't really have any validity because it was doing the chalitza on any woman on the street. So the halacha is who muter b'krayvaseh who v'hi muteres b'krayvo. Normally, if someone does chalitza on a woman, all of her relatives are usher to him, such as her sister, such as her mother, and vice versa. V'hi muteres b'krayvo. Normally, if you do chalitza on a woman, she's usher to marry your brother, and so on and so forth. But since this chalitza turned out it wasn't really a chalitza because she wasn't zakuk to Yibum because she had a child. Therefore, we look at it like there's no chalitza at all. And the halacha is that almana is allowed to marry a kohen, but a chalutza may not marry a kohen. But this woman, even though she had chalitza done to her, but it wasn't a chalitza, therefore she's mutter. Therefore she's mutter to a kohen. Who does the action, by the way, when chalitza is done? Who does the action? She takes off his shoe, right? So why does it say hachoyleitz? Why is he doing it to her? Isn't it something that she did to him? So there's actually a talk about it even in the Rishonim why it's called his action. So one of the Rishonim learn that when he puts on the shoe, it has to be l'shem. I think it has to be l'shem to do the chalitza. So that's he has a chelik in it, but that's what the Rishonim say. He has to prepare for it, so that's why it's called hacholos. But technically, shoes doing all the work. It's similar to a barbecue. The man made the barbecue. She prepares the meat. She seasons the meat. She soaks the meat. She gives you the ketchup to put on. You stand there by the grill. So it's called hacholos. I made the barbecue. So it's similar. It's similar.
Doesn't he initiate? Doesn't he initiate the process of chalitza as far as him not wanting to do yibum?
Yeah, it's like he tells her, "I'm in the mood of a barbecue." I just muted it. He has to say that he doesn't want to take her. He has to say that he doesn't want to do yibum. So maybe that's the reason why it's called acholos, because he's the one who makes that decision whether or not it should be done, because in fact she doesn't have a say in the matter. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. What if it's ein of vlat shel kayama? What if it turns out that the baby was not of vlat shel kayama? Rashi says shehaya nethel. So now it turns out that the chalitza was in fact very effective. So the halach is who also b'kroiv vaysa. He's not allowed to marry her kroivin once again because she's his chalutza. The asur b'kroivov and the pasla b'nakuna because in fact she is a chalutza. Now what happens if the stakes go higher? Hakonis is member. He was konis is Yevamos. V'nim tismu beres v'chmon l'tzlot. So now they have a problem on their hands. Yeah, because he was over in Ishizach. No, that's a good part. Yeah, the Yoldan she gave birth. Bisman shavlat shel kayama. If the baby survives, Yosy, he has to give her a get because he's not allowed to remain married to her because it's Eishus Ach shaloi b'makom mitzvah. V'chayovin b'karban, and they're chayiv a carbon chatos for being over on the chayiv increases of Eishus Ach. V'mein vlat shel kayama. If the child does not survive, the child is a nethel, then yikayim, then he could stay married to her because he did yibum. Although at the time he did the yibum, it's not clear whether or not yibum was warranted. Safek ben tishel rishon, Safek ben shival achron. What if a baby is born, but we don't know? Is it the son of the person who did yibum, or is it the son of the deceased? So the halach is Yosy, being that there's a child here, we're choshed that maybe it's the child of the deceased, and therefore there was no din for yibum. It was isha ishzach, so he has to divorce her. But v'avlat kosher, the vlat is kosher b'manavshach, because if it's the vlat of the deceased, right? If it's the vlat of the deceased, then it's not a mamzer. It's a yosef. And if it's the vlad of the brother who did yibum, then it's also not a mamzer because it's the child of a yibum. So regardless, the child is not a mamzer. Although the marriage cannot remain, the child is for sure a kosher child. And this couple would have to bring a nashim tolui because they don't know whether or not they were over chayv creatures, and then you do it on tolui. I'm sorry. Today they can take DNA tests. That's right. That's right.
But they're supposed to wait, aren't they? Supposed to wait 3 months?
Right. Today they would also do a pregnancy test. Right. They wouldn't have made such a mistake. So there's a very interesting thesis over here. That's right. That's right. So let's see what I'm sorry.
So this is a case where they didn't wait for 3 months? They're supposed to, but correct. They didn't.
That's correct. That's correct. That's what Tosh is going to discuss. It's speaking where he did chalitza or bia, depending on which case in the Mishnah you are, within 3 months. If it was after 3 months and she was showing no signs of pregnancy, a my chayav carbon. Why would he be mechuyev a carbon? Even the Rav Nashim Ubram Nicker Lishlish, since most women at 3 months you would have already been able to tell if she's pregnant, and her Vizu Hayel V'Loyhokar, they waited 3 months and there was no sign of pregnancy. So therefore, what should he have done? And that's called Korab Loinus. And since it's Korab Loinus, there he would not be mechuyev. He would not be mechuyev to bring a korban chatas. So the question there is, that's Tosfos' approach. Tosfos' approach is, if it's within 3 months, it's a suffix. That's why you bring a korban chatas. But if it's after 3 months, that's korban loinus. You don't even mean a korban. Ritva comes at this from the opposite direction. He asks, I don't understand. If it was after 3 months, okay, then you bring a chatas. But within 3 months, you're a pesheya. How dare you? You wouldn't want to do the deal within 3 months. So I was sorry because you have to wait for Abchana. You have to wait to see. So if anything, that's korban amazing. That's what the Ritva asks. So the Ritva says the reason why it's not considered korban amazing, even within 3 months, is because although after 3 months a woman is showing and then you clearly see that she's pregnant, but generally there are signs of pregnancy that come even before 3 months. Right? She stops getting her period and she's achy, and in the middle of the night she asks you to get her ice cream. Right? So there's different signs that a woman would have that she's pregnant. So since she didn't have those signs up to Ritva, that is not considered korban amazing. But nevertheless, you still be lachatus. And Tosfos takes the opposite approach. That for the first 3 months, that's considered a suffix, and after 3 months, it's korban loinus, and you wouldn't even be chayiv a korban. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. The Noid of Yehuda brings out a very interesting case. So the halacha is it's called korban loinus. If you waited 3 months, being that you have a roiv, that roiv women would be noticeable if they were pregnant after 3 months, so therefore it's called korban loinus. However, what's the halacha if a woman is a naguna, they don't know where her husband is, and 2 Eidim, not 1 Eid, but 2 Eidim, come and say that they saw that he was killed, and she remarries based on the testimony of 2 Eidim, and then her husband shows up. The halacha is she brings a chatas. So the question is, why is that considered not korban loinus? She got married al pi shnei edim. There's nothing better than that. So the Noid Yehuda makes a distinction, an interesting distinction, and he says when it turns out that the 2 edim were false, fake testimony, that's obviously the case if the guy shows up, then you do bring a korban chatas. That's not called korban loinus. Korban loinus is here, even if it turns out that she's pregnant, but you weren't able to tell after the 3 months, the roiv is still there. You still have a solid roiv, that roiv noshim would be showing after 3 months. So therefore it's called korban loinus, because even though there was a mishap over here and she turned out being pregnant, but the roiv still stands. But when the whole reason to be mad to her turned out to be bogus, l'mafreya, then you don't say it's korban loinus. That's the Noid of Yehuda's chiddush. Okay, so Hela Gemara.
Yosy.
Yes.
So just for her herself, wouldn't she know before 3 months?
I'm sorry?
Why is it by
Wouldn't
nicker?
she know? How would she know?
Her period would stop way before that. Wouldn't she know? She doesn't
Right,
wait
that's
for
why-
stuff to show.
right.
She knows herself for her body that long before 3 months before.
And that's what Ritva says. Why? That's what Ritva says. Why it's not called korban amazed within 3 months, because she was able to tell that she wasn't pregnant, right? And it turns out she was wrong. So sure, women could often tell, but sometimes they're mistaken. That's called oops.
2 months. Okay.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Look at the Gemara. Itmar hacholet leme uberes ve'pila. A woman was muberes, and we knew that she was a muberes, and then she lost her child. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, eino tricha chalitza menach. After she's mapel, which means now we know for sure she needs chalitza. The chalitza that was done earlier during the time where we weren't yet sure what the situation would be is still a good chalitza. Rishlakish Amar, tricha chalitza menachem. And Tosfos says she needs chalitza. Tosfos says she needs a chalitza. Why does she need a chalitza? Because at the time that the chalitza was done, she was a muberes. That chalitza is not good. Because it says muberes.
Why would they have done chalitza?
Wrongfully. They did chalitza for whatever reason. It's even if they didn't know she was a muberes. I mean, the discussion here is not halach. The discussion is why would they have done it if she was there. Let's see if Rashi says it. Rashi doesn't say, but they assume that she was muberes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, ein tzarich chalitza v'nachen. Why? Because chalitzas muberes shema chalitza. When you do chalitza on the muberes, that's considered a good chalitza. Ubias muberes shema bia. And who adin? If yibum was done while the woman was pregnant, where it for sure would be usher, but she was mappa later, it would be considered a good yibum, even though it was on the muberes, and at that time we weren't even sure whether or not yibum would be necessary or if yibum is even mutter. Because chalitza muberes lo shma chalitza and bias muberes lo shma bia. What is the reasoning behind this machlokes? It's either a pasuk or it's a svara. Rashi, the Bach plays with the Gersa here a little bit, so I'm going to read from the Bach. If it's going to be a pasuk, you'll say Rabbi Yochanan and Tzavar. It says uvein ein loy. When is yibum done? If there's no son, ayin alav. Look for it. In other words, you look at the end of the game. At the end of the day, was there a son or was there not a son? If at the end of the day there was no son because the son was a nefel, the son died, or there was a miscarriage, come to chois that she was mechuyev in yibum, and therefore the chalitza would have been kosher even though she was pregnant at the time, and the yibum would have been kosher even though she was pregnant at the time. The boy same as svara, or maybe it's a svara. Rabbi Yochanan Savar im yavai Elio v'yomer. What if Elio would have come during her pregnancy and told us to ha'i abra mapulim apra? This baby that she's carrying will not survive. So we know now that she's not going to have a child. So mila bas chalitza v'yibam. Wouldn't we know for sure that she's considered a bas chalitza v'yibam? So hashtanami tigli milsalam afreya. So to here, where we didn't know at the time, but we found out later, it turns out that at that time, in fact, she was royal yibum. Rish Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says, Tigli milsalam afreya lo amrinam. You don't say Tigli milsalam afreya, which in and of itself is a very difficult thing to understand, because we always say Tigli milsalam afreya. It turns out that this child wasn't really a child of Kayama. So what's the svara of Rish Lakish to say you don't say Tigli milsalam afreya? You find many times where we say Tigli milsalam afreya. So Tosfos addresses this with one simple line. And Tosfos says, Tiglei milsa l'mafreya lo yamrinan. The avagav l'kamon gav say because you do say it. So he says over here. Tosfos explains it beautifully. He says it over here that I'm sorry. Lo yidami dahacha ein zeh safek royal isbar achshav. Actually, he says it earlier. He doesn't say it here. That's what I was referring to, not to the later Tosfos. At that point, it was royally iskayim, meaning how do you know that this was always also to be a nefel? Maybe this was a perfectly viable child, and something occurred. She ate something, she drank something, she jumped. We don't know at any moment what happened. So it could be at that time it was a viable child. And Rish Lakish shows, even if later on she loses the child, if at that point she has a viable child, chalitza and yibum are not appropriate at that time. That's what Rabbi Yochanan holds in Chanami. It's exactly what Rabbi Yochanan holds. Zok to Gemara, and what's the kra on Rish Lakish's end? Rish Lakish over ubein ein loy ayin alav. So Rish Lakish has a completely different ayin alav means. And here Rish Lakish says, Hoyl uva shah royal yiskayim. Once again, at that moment, it could have been niskayim. So look for any type of blood, even if at the end this child doesn't survive. But if at that moment there's a child here, yibum and chalitza are not appropriate. So that is the shayla. During this time where she's pregnant and we don't know if the child will be mekuyim or not, Do you say you just look at the end like Rabbi Yochanan, or do you say right now she's not in a situation that's conducive to Yibum or Chalitza? So Esei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. Of course, the rayas are going to come from our Mishnah. Esei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. Ein Vlad shel kayam. Our Mishnah says if the Vlad doesn't survive, which means that the Chalitza done earlier during her pregnancy, the Chalitza done earlier during her pregnancy was a valid Chalitza. Who asur b'kroiv eseh, he asur b'kroiva, who pasal b'nakuna. Zok Rabbi Yochanan b'shlama l'didi, damina chalitzas muberes shma chalitza. According to me, that chalitza during the time where she was muberes is a good chalitza. It makes perfect sense why all of the halachas are as if it was a good chalitza. Jemachi pasla. That's why she's pasal to a kohen because chalitza was done on her. El didach the amrit chalitzas muberes lo shma chalitza. According to you, that it's not even considered a chalitza. Am I possible not kahuna? Why in the world would she be possible from kahuna if in fact the chalitza was not a chalitza? Amrlei zok mishlakish. You're right. According to me, the chalitza had no validity. However, midrabanon ulachumr ba'amal. We're machmer because it looks like a chalitza was done because physically they went through the motions and there was a tumult. There was a chalitza done. So we're afraid really she could marry a kohen. But we're afraid that if we let her marry a kohen, people are going to allow a real chalutza to marry a kohen. And for that reason, a machmer, and the Mishnah says, pasal minakuna.
She won't be able to marry a kohen because she still needs a chalitza. According to herself, she needs another one.
No, she does. She doesn't need a chalitza because let's say chalitza was done on another sister at that point, on another wife. Let's say chalitza was done on another wife at that point. It's lav dafka that the chalitza would have to be done to her.
If somebody gives a get batos, I don't know if that's possible to do such a thing, but would we say the same kind of thing? Like once you give it, it's done?
Well, there is such a logic, but I'm sure we can have a lump to make a difference. There's always a way out. There's always a way out. You can always Talmudic logic your way out of anything. So tomorrow, there are those who brought a raya from this same case in the Mishnah from Rish Lakish against Rabbi Yochanan, and that was as follows: Ein Vlad shel kayama. Our Mishnah says if the Vlad did not survive, then it turns out the Marfreya that it's a good chalitza. So who asur b'kroiv eseh, the he asur b'kroiva, who pasla menakuna. Zok Rish Lakish b'shem eladidi. According to me, everything makes sense. Damina chalitzas moberes loishma chalitza hanu dekatani pasla menakuna l'chomer. How does the Mishnah describe an ineffective chalitza? It describes an ineffective chalitza. An effective. How does it describe this chalitza, which at the time was ineffective, and therefore you would need another chalitza? But we're only considering that a chalitza l'chumra is by saying that you have all these surim, right? It's possible in kahuna and it's also in the krivis. But the Mishnah should have said a much greater chiddush if it's a real chalitza. The Mishnah could have said, "V'loikatani eina tzricha chalitza menachem." That's what the Mishnah should have said. If the vlad is not a vlad shel kayama, which means L'Marfreya, turns out she needed the chalitza, so the Mishnah should have said that the chalitza that was done earlier is perfectly effective and no additional chalitza is required. That's not what the Tana said. The Tana just said that it's possible nakuna. According to you, Rabbi Yochanan, where the chalitza is actually effective, ain't it tzricha chalitza menachem boile. The Tana should have said not l'chumra that you don't let her marry a kohen. The Mishnah should have said the biggest chiddush to kula that no new chalitza is required at this point. Elamai, since the Tana didn't say that, I have raya l'chmizak v'shlokish. In fact, the Mishnah holds you do need to do another chalitza. However, the woman who had the chalitza earlier is still considered tzula v'nakun. Amrlei. So Rabbi Yochanan answered back, you have a very good point. In fact, the Tana should have said a greater chiddush and should have said that Eina Tzricha Chalitza Menachem, the Chalitza originally during the pregnancy was impacted. But I did the Tana Reisha, Loi Pasla. But since in the Reisha's case, where she ended up having a child, the Mishnah is saying Loi Pasla Menakahuna. So the Tana, for the sake of keeping the cases parallel, focused on the same wording that was used in the Reisha. Tana Sefer Pasla. Okay, now we'll have round two. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked another kasha. Ein Vlad shel kayama yekayim. If the Vlad does not survive, then he can keep his wife because the yibum that he did was a kosher yibum. Bishlemel the dizak Rabbi Yochanan. Tamina chalitas muberes shema chalitza, and ubias muberes shema bia mishumachi ketani yikayim. That's why he can keep this woman, because the Yibam was effective and she's his wife now. Elalididach, according to Yerush Lakish, that the original Yibam was not a good Yibam. Damid chalitas muberes loishna chalitza, and by extension ubias muberes loishna bia. Well, then the Yachzer, the Yivoil, the Yikayim, Mibaile. He was not yet Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibam. So the Tana would have to tell us that you are not Yod the mitzvah of Yibam, and he has to make another Bia in order to be able to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibam. According to Mishok, he just keeps her as a wife because he already did Yibam. But according to you, he needs to do Yibam. Zok Gemara, Reish Lakish will learn my Yikayim. What does Yikayim mean in the Mishnah? What does it mean? He should keep her. It means Yachzer, the Yivoil, the Yikayim. He should make another bia and keep her as a wife. Because without doing another bia, in fact, the yibam has not yet been completed. Ikudamri, there are those who, again, looks at this from the opposite direction and brings a raya from these same words against Rabbi Yechanan to Reish Lakish. Eisei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yechanan. Ein avlat shel kayama yikayim. Bishlam elad yizak b'shlakish. Tamina chalitas muberes loish machalita and bias muberes loish mabia. Hani dekatani yikayim. What does it mean yikayim? Yikayim is a physical get up and go, a kumvasei action. Yikayim. How are you yikayim? By yachzer v'yivel v'yikayim. You actually have to take a positive step of yikayim by doing another bia. So now we're looking at it that yikayim is telling you that you have to do the evil. That there's only a passive requirement. You don't have to divorce her, but you don't have to do anything at all because the yibum has already been completed. The Mishnah should have said, Ratza Yosy, Ratza Yikayim B'ayla. If he wants, he can give her a get. If he wants, he can keep her. But there's no requirement of him because he has already fulfilled his yibum. So Gemara Einachanami, you have a point. So why does it just say Yikayim? I did turn a Reisha Yosy, since in the Reisha's case, where it turns out the child was viable, there he has to divorce her, so it uses the word Yosy. So to contrast the Yosy of the Reisha, Tananami Seifa Yikayim. Okay, now we're going to move on from our Mishnah and bring rise from other places. Mese, Hakaynis es yivimtoi v'nimta mehuberes. If someone did yibum on a woman, and it turned out that she was pregnant, harezu loy sinasei tzarasa. Never mind the Yevama cannot get married, but even if the Yevama has a co-wife, that co-wife can't get married either. Why? Shema Yehi Vlad ben Kayam. Maybe this child, so there's wife A, there's wife B. Wife A is expecting. If wife A is expecting, wife B cannot get married. Why? Because if wife B might still be mechuyev in yibum, because maybe the child is viable. So that makes no sense at all. Because if the child is viable, then no one needs yibum. So of course you should be able to get married. No, it doesn't. I'm not saying you get married to the brother. Get married to you can marry out. So the Gemara is saying, the Braysh is saying that since wife A is pregnant and wife A might have a viable child, therefore wife B cannot marry anybody. She's still bound by Yibum. Frankly, that makes no sense at all. Ki hava havlad ben kayama. If it turns out that wife A's baby is a good baby, then mifter atzarasa. Then surely this co-wife is allowed to marry anybody. She's a regular almana with no bind of zika, with no chiyav yibum. So that cannot be pashup shot in the brisa. Elaima, the way we're going to have to explain this brisa is shema lo yehi havlad ben kayam. The reason why we cannot let wife B get married, because if wife A's baby has a miscarriage, or if it doesn't survive, then kum tachay's wife A and wife B are still zakuk yibum, and therefore neither wife A nor wife B can get married because could be there's still zakuk yibum. Frek the Gemara, frek the Gemara. Bias muberes shmabia. You hold like Rabbi Yochanan that the bia of a muberes is a good bia. Amai loy sinasei tzarasa. Why shouldn't the Torah be able to get married? Tiftar b'bia shel chavita mimanavshich. If the baby survives, then wife B for sure could marry anybody because she's never zakuk yibum. And if the baby doesn't survive, well then the yibum that was done on her already is matter both almonds. So now B should be able to get married. So the question here is, why can't wife B get married? If wife A's baby is good and it's a real child, and no one's up with the yibum, and even if wife A's baby dies, there was a yibum done to wife A, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, that yibum was a good yibum. So why in the world can't this tzara marry Lashuk? Why do you say there's any zika here? So you must have a raya from here. In fact, that the yibum that he did was not a good yibum because he was a muberes. So you have a clear raya like Rish Lakish. Amar Abaye is Abaye bivia kula alma like pligi like patra. So we have to already make a concession. Rabbi Yochanan didn't ever say that yibum done on the muberes is a good yibum. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan agrees to Rish Lakish that yibum done on the muberes is not a good yibum, even if she ends up losing her child later. Ki pligi, the whole machlokes is bechalitza. Rabbi Yochanan tzavar chalitzas muberes shma chalitza, and bias muberes lo shma bia. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the chalitza of a muberes is a good chalitza, but the bia of a muberes is not a good bia, and it's proven from this price. So for lamdonim, this is a nightmare, or it's heaven. It depends on what your perspective is, because it's saying that there's a difference in the zika of a woman who does yibam versus a woman who does chalitza. Well, that's been different than the zika, because if there's a zika here, then if there's a zika here that chalitza can take care of, so why isn't that same zika able to be taken care of by a yibam? The zika is what creates the choice between the chiyuv chalitza and yibam. So if there's a reason to make a chalitza, then by definition the yibam should be able to be made as well. So the lamdanim work on this. There's a lot of good Rosh Hashiva shiurim on this. That's why Yevamos is such good fodder for Rosh Hashiva shiurim, because you have all these problems, these technical problems that you need to learn this. So the Kovetz Aretz, the Rabbi Chaim Kovetz Aretz, speaks about. He says a chiddush that could be the zika of chalitza is different than the zika of yibam. How do you know what's going to happen before if there's yibam or chalitza going to happen? That's another shir. That's another shir. But this is the rate. This is serious. You need serious lumdus to get around this. Victor was just talking about if it's a Suffolk divorce, which he just the kohen. This is the major leagues lumdus over here. You know, how do you make that distinction between yibum and chalitza? That yibum doesn't work, but chalitza does work. Rashi wouldn't kill all these Rosh Hashivas Torah. Rashi knows the Rosh Hashivas need to have Torah and lumdus. So Rashi, says, okay, we'll leave that for the next generation. Rashi probably could have explained this whole thing with a half a word, right? And he's sitting and laughing at all the Rosh Hashiva shurim that are going on for ages on this. Okay, let's talk to Gemara. Let's talk to Gemara. Rishlok Yishavar, BS Muberes, Loishma Bia, Bechalitas Muberes, Loishma Chalitza. Oh, so what does the article say?
Actual nights of evil. It could be evil or a kind of one done to forbidden act of living with the brother's wife. It might not be subject to that either. Therefore, the forbidden act of evil is invalid, even if it subsequently emerges that the child is not alive.
Since at the time it was usher, something that at the time is usher. Who does he say that from? Okay, so Monty saying over from the Rishonim, from places over here. Okay, so what he's saying is that by bia, since it's done by Isser, therefore it's not doesn't have an impact. Chalitza, which is done by Heter, has an impact. Okay, it's a very nice word. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Rishlok have a bias muberes loishma bia and chalitza muberes loishma chalitza. Amalei Rava. So this was Abaye was the one who had to modify Rabbi Yochanan Shita and say that Rabbi Yochanan agrees that bias muberes loishma bia. Rava didn't like Abaye's pshat. Amalei Rava monavshech. It doesn't make any sense. Bias muberes shma bia, then chalitza's muberes shma chalitza. Bias muberes loishma bia, then chalitza's muberes nami loishma chalitza. The Kaimelon, we know the general rule when it comes to Yibam and Chalitza that they travel together. HaKoil, the Koil ha'oila liyibam. I can't get this to focus here. The Chol ha'oila liyibam, oila lichalitza. The Chol she'ena oila liyibam, ena oila lichalitza. So, Frank Rabbi Tabaya, I don't like your approach to Rabbi Yochanan to make that distinction between Yibam and Chalitza, because we all know that they travel together. Elo Amar Rabba. So Rabba wants to offer another teretz. Hachik Amar, I'm going to tell you pshat in this brayso. And really, Rabbi Yochanan holds that the bia is a good bia. The question is, back on this brayso, why do we say that if the vlad, since it could be that the vlad is Einu ben Kayama, therefore wife B cannot remarry because there's no yibam, it would have been a good yibam according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar Rabba Hachik Amar, if someone was already kodesh his wife, his Yevamos, and she turned out being pregnant, so he did yibam already. Harezu loyti nasi tzarasa the Tzara should not marry. Why not? Shemi Vlad ben Kayama. Maybe the Vlad will be a ben Kayama. If it's a ben Kayama, so she was already allowed to marry out, so let her marry right now because it might be a ben Kayama. And it's Mamavshach. If the Vlad's a ben Kayama, so she's a free woman. And even if the Vlad's not a ben Kayama, Yibam was done already. Zokt the Mishnah, no. Because Ubias Muberes loy shma bia, v'chalitas Muberes loy shma chalitza, v'avlad eine poiter ad sheyetze la'avir ha'olam. So again, why? Shema Yehei Vlad ben Kayama. If the Vlad will be a ben Kayama, then even Rabbi Yechon agrees that in fact, if the child survived, that bia was not a kosher ibam, that bia was a iser of znus of eshzach, and the chalitza is muberes loishma chalitza. There's a Vlad here, so the chiddush here is va'vlad einay poiter ad sheyetzi lavir olam. Even if a woman is a child, and that patters her from ibum, that child only patters her from ibum once the child is born. Since she's expecting now, you can't let the other woman marry because right now she doesn't have a heter.
Even in a case where there was no Yevamos, right?
Correct.
There was two wives. One of them was pregnant, and we know she's going to have a baby soon.
That's right.
So we can't assume that she's going to have the baby.
No, even if we can assume she's going to have the baby, the heter of the baby only comes once it's born. The heter of the baby only comes once it's born, and that's why she has to wait. Tanya Kavasa de Rabba. We even have a brisa that supports this sheet of Rabba that when a baby's born, the baby only creates a heter for the woman to marry without yibum, only breaks the zika once the baby is born already. Because it says, "Hakodesh yivimtoi v'nimtis muberes harezu loisi nosit tzarasa."
What is she before? Is it Zika or it's just a whole? No head.
There's probably the nibum because he's saying bevada. It's not. It seems like it's not a suffix, or unless it's only a derabana. So let's see what the Gemara says. Tani kavasa derabah. Hakodesh yivimtoi v'nimtis muberes harezu loisi nosit tzarasa. Shema Yehei Vlad ben Kayama, Vein Bia Bechalitza Poiteres, El Vlad Poiter. Come to Chayis, what's pattering her Lashuk, not the Bia or the Chalitza, because that's not appropriate in this case. Rather, the fact that there's a child born, that's what's being matter her Lashuk. The Vlad Ein Poitra Ad Sheyetze Lavira Olam. The Vlad will not patter her from her Chiv Yibum until the Vlad is born and Kayim. Taima, so the bride here is much more clear. And the Brisa says, "Taima the Shemi Vlad ben Kayama, the Shemi Vlad ben Kayamahu. Haloi have a Vlad ben Kayama. If there was no Vlad ben Kayama, Mifta Terasa. I'm sorry. Now the Gemara is going into a new halacha. So up until this point, we've proven Rava's point that Vavlad ain't Poitra Chiyach Alav Olam because the Brisa says it's prepared. But now that we have this Brisa, the Gemara says, let's extract some more information from this Brisa. Taima the Shemi Vlad ben Kayamahu. If the Vlad will not be a ben Kayama, mifter tzarasa, then in fact the yibum that was done earlier would have been a good yibum, right? The whole reason why she can't get married is because maybe the baby would be viable and then the heter doesn't come until later. But on the other side of the suffix, that if the baby is not viable, then the yibum still would be a good yibum. Once again, this is a kasha rish lakish because it seems to indicate that on the side that the baby is not a ben Kayama, the yibum done during the pregnancy was a good yibum. This is how I would interpret the Brisa. Someone was kindness as Yevamos, and it turned out she was pregnant. The Tzara married. Shema lo yehei havlad ben Kayama. Maybe the Vlad will not be a ben Kayama. And I Rish Lakish hold the Chalitas Muberes Loishma Chalita Ubias Muberes Loishma Bia. And even if you're going to tell me, and even if you're going to tell me, why do I need to be choshish for the miyut, that the child won't survive, and say that she's also l'shok because it's not a good chalitza or not a good ibum, why don't we go basarayim? And we say if this woman is pregnant, chances are the baby's going to be viable. So let her go l'shok now. Let this woman be free now. So on that, the Brisa says, Vlad ein poiter achiyetze lavir ha'olam. Even when there is a baby, the baby is only matter the almana l'shok when the baby is actually born.
Can she remarry if she's pregnant? She's mutter l'shok while she's pregnant. She doesn't have to wait.
Well, that's a whole different shaila because we're going to learn soon that a woman, midrabanan is exered that a woman up to her until her child is 24 months old, she's not allowed to remarry. That's
Because it's
considered
going
a
to affect, right. Okay.
because it'll affect her nursing if she becomes pregnant again. So Amar Belazar. Belazar said, this is a very big chiddush over here. Shlakish is chiddush. After Isa, lahadar shlakish, non-love masnisin. Rish Lakish is saying a big chiddush that a bia or a chalitza done during a pregnancy has no validity. We've had kashas back and forth from our mishnayos, but a chiddush like that should have been much more explicitly mentioned in a mishnah or brisa somewhere. Zakt Gemara, nafak dok va'ashkach. They went out and they found a brisa that a mishnah that actually says this, and everybody knows what's pshat of nafak dok va'ashkach. That's right. When you come here from Mariv at the 9:45, and you see half of the staff of the Masifta and half of the staff of Rebbe Kavman's yeshiva sneaking peeks at the Art Scroll and the Masifta Gemara and the Chavrusa Gemara, and you wonder, so get one over there. Why do you have to come here to use it? The teretz is because it doesn't pass for them to use it over there. The Talmidim are going to see that their Rebbeim are using Art Scroll, so they come over here where no one notices them. So the Masifta Gemara brings down to justify itself. It brings down Pshat and Nafak Dak V'Ashkach is in those days. It was just when people were forgetting the Mishnayos and they have to start talking about writing them down. So they wrote them down. But it's such a pass for a real Talmid Chacham to go look up a Mishnayos inside. If Teresh Halapeh, you're supposed to know it. So So what did they do? What did the Tanoim do? Nafak Dak, they went to the Agura at night at 9:45 for Meir, where the Talmidim weren't around, and then they looked up the Mishnayos. So nothing has changed. The Ashka did none be learned. Ha'isha shahalach baila b'terasa l'medina sayam. A woman who her husband and her tzara. So a man is married to wife A and wife B, and the husband goes on a business trip along with wife A and leaves wife B at home. Ubo v'amrula, and they came and told her, Meis bailach, your husband in Medina Sayam is not coming back. Now she doesn't know if that other wife might be pregnant. So can she remarry, or is she mechuyev to do yibum? So Arezu loisi nase v'loitis yabik. She's stuck. She's an aguna. Acheteda, until she knows shema muberes hitzarasa. Maybe her co-wife is muberes, and if she has a child, if she knows she muberes and has a child, then she can remarry. But if not, she needs yibum. So Frekmar b'shtami yibum eloi. I understand why there's no yibum. Shema yehevlad ben kayama. Maybe there would be a vlad ben kayama. I guess not. And then the Yifka be Israel Eshazach. And then it'll end up being an Eshazach Deraisa. Eloi Sachloitz, why can't you do Chalitza? Then Mimanushach shall be okay. Elot Amai, Bishlama, it's 6:52. Okay, we'll do 3 more minutes and then we'll stop. Eloi Sachloitz, Amai, Bishlama Sachloitz, Bisoich Test, Bisinasi Bitoich Test Loi, Bishlama to let her get married within 9 months. In other words, before we would know if the other baby was born, Hainu Suffolk. That would be a Suffolk because we don't know yet if there'll be a baby born. Ella Tachloit B'Soich Tisha. Let her do Chalitza right away, but she won't get remarried with Zinasil Achatisha, and she won't get married until after we know whether or not the baby was born. Elamai, you have arrived from here that a Chalitza during the pregnancy is not a good Chalitza. And that's why she has to wait until after 9 months, after a pregnancy is over, after the baby is born, before to even try the chalitza. The bride says she has to wait until she has clarity. Was this woman expecting? Did she have a baby or not? Why can't you do chalitza after 9 months? If a baby was born, she can marry Lashuk. If not, there was a chalitza done. You can't bring me any riot to this shaila from the brayso we just quoted. The Abai bar Avin, Rav Chinina bar Avin, the Amri Tarvayu, they both say, Shema Yehev Vlad ben Kayama, maybe the Vlad will survive. The Nimtas Atamachriza Cruz L'Chahuna. Yes, sure, she could make the Chalitza. But the problem is, if it turns out that in fact her sister, her wife, her co-wife, had a baby, well then her Chalitza was not a Chalitza, was a bogus Chalitza. If it was a bogus chalitza, then she's allowed to marry a kohen. But in order to let her marry a kohen, we're going to have to announce that her chalitza was a bogus chalitza. Otherwise, people will think she's also a kohen. The fact is more of a litzvah, so big deal. So make the announcement. Why is that a problem? For that, you're not going to let her get married because you're going to have to announce later on that she was not really a chalitza. So tomorrow, yeah, that's a problem. Because Dilma Ika Inish Dava B'Chalitza, there might have been people who witnessed her Chalitza, will have a Bachrosa, and they didn't hear that the Chalitza ended up being bogus. And then they'll see her marry a Kohen, and people are going to say that a Chalitza can marry a Kohen. So because of that, we make her wait. We don't let her do Chalitza. We make her wait until they find out what happens. Amalei Abaye, Midi loy sachloich, v'loy yavim katani. It doesn't say she shouldn't make a chalitza on the brisa. It says like she knows v'loy yavim katani, v'loy chalitza. Avoli chalitza hachanami deshari. In fact, Zok Abaye, you wouldn't make the chalitza. The brisa doesn't say she can't make chalitza. The brisa says she cannot do yivim. She can't marry. But avada she could do a chalitza. So this whole thing is nishkashtoigen, nishkafloigen. So we still don't have a right to Rish Lakish. So we'll just learn one more line. It's a simple Tanya Kos Rish Lakish. Hachalit l'muberes ve'pila shricha chalita mina achin. Period. So you see a brisa that supports Rish Lakish because that even if she was mapil, you still need another chalitza. So here's where it says beferish. And the Amarav Hilchos Kavas Rish Lakish banetlas. So the Gemara is going to say that there's three halachas that Rish Lakish says a chiddush. We pass like him, and the first one is this halacha. We pass like Rish Lakish that the chalitza of a muberes is not a good chalitza. Okay, let's stop here. See, I didn't have a right to go weiter because had I come on time, we would have been